December 8th, 1980, late afternoon, in front of the Dakota apartment building in New York. In the photo, a man leaning forward with a pen in his hand is signing an album. His hair is long. His round glasses reflect the winter light. He's smiling. That's John Lennon, and he's signing a copy of his brand new album, Double Fantasy, for a fan. The fan is standing right next to him, chubby, wearing glasses, quiet. He's holding out the album with both hands. A photographer captured this moment. This photo exists. You can find it. Less than 6 hours after this moment, that same fan would be standing at the exact same spot, waiting for Lennon to return. And when Lennon passed through that same arched passageway at 10:50 p.m., the fan would shout his name, pull out a gun, and take John Lennon's life. John Lennon spent his entire life being abandoned by the very people who were supposed to love him. His father abandoned him. His mother gave him away to others. And on the last day of his life, he was killed by someone who claimed to be his biggest fan. This is the story of a man who sang songs about peace, but was met with violence in return. It is the story of a man who spent 40 years searching for the love he never received as a child, and who, in the end, found it just as it was about to be taken from him. John Winston Lennon was born on October 9, 1940, in Liverpool, England, in the midst of a German air raid. His mother, Julia, named him after the Prime Minister, giving him Winston as his middle name. His father, Alfred, everyone called him Alf, was a merchant marine. He wasn't there at the birth. In fact, he wasn't there for most of his life. Alf Lennon was the kind of father you'd only see on postcards, an occasional letter, a visit now and then. Then, months passed without a word. By the time John turned 4, his parents had separated, and his father had all but vanished from his life. He just stopped showing up. That can be even worse than a dramatic breakup. At least anger is a kind of presence. Absence, on the other hand, is simply nothingness. And Julia, John's mother, didn't raise him either. She couldn't, or she didn't want to. The reasons are complex and depend on who's telling the story. What is documented is this. When John was 4 years old, Julia's older sister, Mimi, contacted social services. She believed Julia was unfit to raise a child. After a series of meetings and negotiations, Julia agreed to transfer custody of John to Mimi and her husband, George. And so, by the time he turned 4, John Lennon had already experienced abandonment by his father, and by the time he turned 4, John Lennon had already experienced his father's abandonment and his mother's decision to give him up by his mother. By the time he turned 4, his father had abandoned John Lennon, and his mother had given him up by his father and given up by his mother. He moved in with Aunt Mimi at a house called Mendips on Menlove Street in Liverpool. A decent home, a decent neighborhood, a decent life. Everything was decent. But what about his inner world? The sudden disappearance of the very people who should have loved him most. When John was 5, his father Alf suddenly reappeared. He took John to Blackpool, a seaside town, and apparently planned to take him to New Zealand. When Julia found out, she came to take John back. Then, a scene unfolded that no 5-year-old should ever have to experience. His parents asked him to make a choice. Mom or Dad? Julia or Alf? Choose one, lose the other. At first, he chose his father. Julia walked toward the door. John screamed and ran after her. He was 5 years old, and he had just learned the most important lesson of his life. Everyone leaves. And when they ask you to make a choice, no matter what you choose, you lose. Aunt Mimi was strict, practical, and, in a way she could never quite put into words, deeply loving. She provided John with stability. She gave him structure. She told him that famous line, "Playing the guitar is wonderful, John, but you'll never make a living at it." She was spectacularly wrong about that. Uncle George died in 1955. John was 14. George was the closest thing John had to a real father, warm, kind, and someone who laughed at John's jokes and encouraged his drawings. And then he was gone too. By the time he turned 14, John Lennon had been abandoned by his father, given away by his mother, and had lost the only father figure he had. Most people would have that burden, would have crushed most people under that burden. John Lennon, however, picked up a guitar. Every pain that burns inside finds an outlet, and John did so through his guitar. Despite everything, despite being put up for adoption, the intervention of social services, and growing up in another woman's home, John and his mother, Julia, were reunited. By the mid-1950s, Julia was visiting Mimi's home regularly. She'd come over for tea and stay for hours, and something wonderful happened. Julia became a fun parent. Julia was not the responsible one. That role belonged to Mimi. Julia was the one who played music, laughed very loudly, taught John to play the banjo, and bought him his first guitar. She had the guitar delivered to her home, not Mimi's, because she knew Mimi wouldn't approve. For several years, both of them were part of John's life. Mimi for stability, Julia for music. It wasn't traditional or orderly, but it worked. And John was happy, or as happy as a child with his past could be. Then, on July 15th, 1958, Julia came to visit Mimi, as she always did. They had tea, they chatted. It was an ordinary Tuesday. When Julia left, she walked toward the bus stop on Menlove Street where Mimi lived. She never made it there. An off-duty police officer struck Julia as she was crossing the street in her car. Julia died at the scene. John was 17. The woman who gave him up for adoption was his birth mother. The woman who came back. The woman who taught him to play music. The woman who, after years of complicated events, finally became the mother he needed. She was killed on the very street where she lived. She was so close to the front door of Mimi's house that someone inside might have heard what happened. John never fully came to terms with this loss. He spoke about it. He wrote about it. Years later, he wrote a song called Julia, one of the most emotional songs ever recorded. And decades after his mother's death, he said in an interview, "I lost her twice, once as a child and once as a young man. The second time was worse because by then I knew what I was losing." This bond is what connects John Lennon and Paul McCartney at the deepest level. Paul had lost his mother, Mary, to cancer when he was 14. When John met Paul, through a mutual friend at a church fair where John's band, The Quarrymen, was playing, they were both young men who had lost their mothers. This shared wound became the foundation of one of the greatest songwriting partnerships in history. They didn't just share chords, they shared their pain. From The Quarrymen to the Beatles, from Liverpool to Hamburg, then to London and all over the world. I'm not going to tell you the whole story of the Beatles. That would take 10 hours, and this video isn't that long. There's just one thing I want to focus on: what the Beatles meant to John Lennon and what it cost him. The Beatles became the greatest band in the history of popular music. This isn't just an opinion, it's a measurable fact. No other band, before or since, has had more #1 albums, sold more records, or had a greater cultural impact. They changed how music was made, recorded, sold, and listened to. They changed hairstyles, fashion, language, and politics. For a time in the 1960s, they were, without a doubt, the most famous people on the planet. They did this in a time when there was no digital distribution network and fame was difficult to get. Today, there are people who become famous overnight in the 2020s. A boy from Liverpool, abandoned by both parents before he could read, was at the center of it all. I think about this story often. The man who created the most beloved music in history was a man who never felt consistently loved as a child. He built a machine that generated love on a global scale. Millions of people shouted his name, cried at his concerts, bought every album, and hung posters of him on their walls. But none of it could fill the void left by Julia and Alf. Fan love is not parental love. It's loud, passionate, and feels like a tsunami, but it's directed at someone who isn't fully there. Fans loved John Lennon of the Beatles. They didn't love the boy from the Mendips who cried when his mother walked out the door. In 1966, John said in an interview that the Beatles were more popular than Jesus. Those words were taken out of context. It turned into a scandal. Albums were burned. Death threats were sent. But if you read the full quote, what John actually meant was that he was disturbed by the degree of blind worship the group was receiving. He wasn't boasting, he was warning. And here lies the irony at the heart of it all. The man who warned the world about the dangers of idolizing celebrities would ultimately be killed by someone who idolized him. I look forward to your comments. Please share your thoughts on each section separately. I'll read them all and respond. The Beatles broke up in 1970. The breakup. The public eye witnessed the ugly breakup, which involved lawyers and made headlines for years. The breakup unfolded publicly, involving lawyers and generating headlines for years. For John, however, it was also a liberation, because what John wanted wasn't to be the biggest rock star in the world. It was something much simpler and much harder. He wanted to be loved, not by millions of people, by just one person, completely, unconditionally. He found that in Yoko Ono. Now, I know what happens when you mention Yoko. Half the internet immediately starts a debate about how she broke up the Beatles. I'm not interested in that debate. What interests me is that Yoko gave John something no one else could, the feeling that he was enough. Not John Lennon of the Beatles, not a genius, not a celebrity, just John, the anxious kid from Liverpool who never gave up on finding a parent to stay by his side. Together, they became activists, bed-ins for peace. The War Is Over campaign, they were mocked by the press, they were ridiculed, but they kept going because John sincerely and deeply believed that music and love could change the world. And in 1971 he wrote Imagine, a single song, a single piano, a single vision, a world without property, religion, countries, or reasons for war. This song became the anthem of an entire generation, and the man who wrote it had every reason to suffer and be cynical, but instead he chose hope. Then, in 1975, John stepped away from music, completely. His son Sean was born, and reflecting on his childhood, John made the most radical decision of his life. He became a full-time father. For 5 years, he didn't record an album, go on tour, or give interviews to the press. He changed diapers, he made breakfast, he took Sean to the park, he watched TV, he baked bread. In his words, he was a stay-at-home dad. His father had disappeared, his mother had given him away to others, and here he was, making a conscious choice to be there for his child, more than anyone had ever been there for him. He was breaking the cycle, not with a song, not with a protest, but with breakfast, bedtime stories, and simply being there every day. By 1980, John was ready to return. He and Yoko recorded Double Fantasy, an album about love, family, and home life. The album was released on November 17, 1980. Reviews were mixed, sales were rising. John was happy, truly happy. Perhaps for the first time in his life, everything was in its right place. He was 40 years old. He had 21 days left. I said I wouldn't discuss the Yoko Ono issue in the video, but I'm curious about your thoughts. Please be sure to share them in the comments. December 8, 1980, a Monday, New York City, cold. Early that morning, a man arrived at the Dakota building. He had flown in from Hawaii. He had been there before, a few weeks earlier, and had left without doing anything. This time, he returned. He spent the entire day outside the building. He spoke with the doorman. He spoke with other fans. At one point, he saw a 5-year-old boy, the son of the man he was waiting for, walking with his nanny. He bent down and shook the little boy's hand. Around 5 p.m., the building's resident and his wife stepped out of the building for a recording session. The man stepped forward holding a copy of the Double Fantasy album. The album was signed. A photographer captured the moment. The photo still exists. It looks like an ordinary interaction with a fan that could happen any day, on any sidewalk. 5 hours later, at 10:50 p.m., the couple returned. Instead of going through the security gate, they got out of the limousine and stepped onto the sidewalk. A voice was heard from among the shadows. "Mr. Lennon?" He slowed his pace. He turned around. What happened next took less than 5 seconds, and a life that had finally found peace after a 40-year search came to an end. The man who did this didn't run away. He sat down on the sidewalk, pulled the book The Catcher in the Rye from his hand, and began to read. When the police arrived, they found him sitting on the sidewalk next to the man who wrote Imagine, reading a novel. The news broke after midnight. Radio stations cut to special broadcasts. Outside the Dakota, crowds gathered on that cold December night, holding candles and singing. In Liverpool, strangers embraced one another on the streets. The Monday night football program was interrupted to announce the news. That night, the world didn't just lose a musician. It also lost the belief that the 1960s, the era of peace, possibility, and faith that love could prevail, was still alive. He was born during an air raid, abandoned by his father, abandoned by his mother, raised by an aunt who told him that making music was a dead-end path. At 14, he lost the only father figure he had. He was reunited with his mother, but lost her right then and there on the very street where he lived. He formed the greatest band in history. He wrote the most hopeful song ever recorded. He stepped away from fame to become the father he'd never had. He came back, he was happy. He'd finally found peace. And he was taken from us right in front of his door, by someone who'd shaken hands with his son that morning, by someone who'd asked for his autograph that afternoon, then by someone sitting on the curb, reading a novel as if nothing had happened. He spent 40 years searching for love. He found it. And a stranger took it from him because he wanted to be famous. The show is over. No encore. But the song, the one about dreaming, is still playing. Right now, somewhere, someone is hearing it for the first time, and for a moment, they believe the world could be different. This is her encore, what she left behind, something nothing can stop. If this story stays with you, subscribe. In every video, we take an in-depth look. Real stories, the silence behind the music. I'm the voice behind No Encore. See you in the next episode.